Okay, hello there, everybody. Let's get some of this stuff showing properly here. Um, Very happy to be here with you today. My name is Terrence, and welcome to Tuesdays with Terrence. We're trying this out. It's our second live stream, and we're very happy to have you with us. Last week, we gave it our first shot and mostly went off without a hitch. We had a little issue with the YouTube feed, but hopefully this time around, we've got it all sorted out. So last week I gave you a little bit of an intro into me as a candidate, for those of you who don't know me, and basically what my campaign's all about. You know what I'm in this for. You know what my platform is like, that sort of thing. And so I encourage people to check back at that stream and let me know what you think. It's a good way to kind of refresh yourselves for those of you who know, and to get to know me for the first time for those of you who don't. But today I wanted to dive into something a little bit more specific. So before I do that, I'll just shout out the ticker at the bottom there. This is really, I've started gathering signatures for the campaign, and I need to get a solid number of them in a short period of time. So if you're in the area and would like to sign to make sure I get on the ballot, you can drop me a line with your city or town at my website, cudneyforma.com/connect. It's there in the bottom. And yeah, so let's jump into the topic today. So I'm going to share this. Okay, we're going to take some of this stuff out of the way so you can see what we're up to today. Okay, so the plan for today is I wanted to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart that actually ties into my earliest sort of real foray into domestic politics and advocacy. And this was around the idea that we should be looking at our politics as a country more regionally. And obviously, as a candidate, I'm running as an independent for state senate on the North Shore. Obviously, the region that is most significant to us here is the Northeast. And so I wanted to kind of take this time to talk a little bit about what it would mean to build Northeastern regional politics and what it can do for us if we were to sort of reframe ourselves with that in mind, reframe our politics with that in mind. So let's get into it. So first, the way I've kind of laid this out is I think there are sort of, a couple of things that might sort of guide us through this idea. And the first is the idea that it's right there. Building Northeastern regional politics means recognizing that there already is a region there that's politically useful, that's politically salient, and that we can use to drive forward politics. And so I'm going to share a Google tab here. Hold on just a second. Okay, so you should be able to see on your screen there a map of the county breakdown of the 2016 election. The 2020 election, for this map was a little bit sparser, so I wanted to go off of this. But the fact is that from year to year, from election year to election year, I should say, politics don't actually change all that much. It might mean a few a few votes go one way or the other, but often the sort of ideological shape of the country doesn't really change. And I'm happy to talk with the chat if folks are interested about what I mean by that. But to start us off, I want to focus in on this region, the Northeast region. And you'll see that there's a decent amount of blue here and a little bit of pink, which is meant to be sort of the tightest contested districts in the, counties in the area. But you'll see that it's mostly concentrated around Massachusetts, where I live and am running, but also New York City, Philadelphia, DC, and actually with a little bit of interspersed pink, there's also a quite blue sort of area of North Carolina, northern North Carolina, and it also actually goes all the way up into Maine. And if we zoom in just a little bit here, so now you can see more of a granular breakdown of these areas. And obviously, there's some interspersed bits of red here, but overall, especially when you think of like where folks live versus where they're commuting to for work, these areas are overall, it's one of the most blue areas of the country. And just imagine for a moment, and we'll obviously get into this in more detail. Just imagine if we were focusing as a block, if this region were focusing as a block on certain political changes, right? We're focusing as a region on moving things forward. And I'll also just mention, and I'll come back to this as well, that this area doesn't really pay a lot of attention to state boundaries. Obviously, there are some states that are, more reliably blue than others. Massachusetts comes to mind. But the fact is, it runs through eastern Pennsylvania and eastern Virginia and into, northeastern North Carolina. But when we think about, states as blue states or red states, it's really a misnomer in the sense that there are more granular ways of looking at our politics that actually show us what we're actually trying to deal with here. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and come back in. And let's go back into the sort of agenda for today. So like I said, it's right there. It's right in front of us, this idea of there being a region that is politically cohesive. And I'll just say a little bit about the fact that, we talk about blue states, we talk about red states, but the fact is the places where you see most sort of drive outside of the duopoly toward progressive policy, towards policy on the left, if you will, that's in that area. That's in those same areas where you're seeing that blue. That's where it's most plausible, at least in my view, that we'll see political change in the direction of the left come from. Okay, so from there, I want to talk about why we need it, right? And this should be fairly obvious to most of us, at least most folks who know me. Excuse me. The fact is that we need it because the federal government isn't really doing the work for us to move things forward. We're just seeing stagnation constantly. And the things that actually move forward are very sort of minimal things that don't really change the game, change the structure of our lives. And that's got to change. We've got to get to a place where we're starting to move things forward. And in particular, I think there are issues that we have solidarity regionally on, that we can move things forward. Things like climate change, things like healthcare, things like discrimination. This is an area of the country where, to the extent that we're doing work, that we're moving policy forward, we are at the forefront, but it's still not nearly enough to really make a difference in people's lives. Universal healthcare is a key part of my platform. I'm a supporter of Medicare for All nationally, as well as MassCare, which is the state initiative for single payer in Massachusetts. I'm in favor of these things. But the fact is, if we're going to bolster our chances of moving this forward, it helps to partner with other states in our area that are also very, that are more towards the progressive side. States like New York, states like Maryland. These are places where we can actually move some policy forward. And by the way, with the issue of healthcare, we talk a lot about risk pools, the idea that the more people that are, the more you spread the risk out in terms of healthcare and have healthy people on it as well as sick people on it, the more likely you are to be able to, spend for that healthcare, to get people to actually have healthcare. And the thing about universal healthcare and specifically single payer is the fact is, we are paying taxes, and the fact is that Medicare for all and mass care will cost less money than the current healthcare system, with all the bureaucracy behind it, with all the insurance hullabaloo involved. And so the fact is that the more people that are engaged in this system, the more we can bring the price down. And it's already, by the way, going to be a lot cheaper than the current state of healthcare is. And so when I say we need it, as I have in the little graphic here for you, that's what I mean. Is there's a real opportunity to move these things forward, especially if we're working together with other states in our region. Okay, so that brings us to our next piece, right? So the fact is, people want it. And what I mean by that is people are looking at the state of stagnation in our politics, and they're looking for change. And by the way, they might actually, if they took a look at those maps, they might see the same thing that I'm seeing. And the fact is that even they might not know that that's what they want, the fact is that they do want it, and there's some polling to reflect that. So what I'm going to show you here is some maps that get into views on secession, regional secession. And to be clear, I am not advocating for regional secession. It's not what I'm about. It's not what I'm interested in. I'm just interested in moving policy forward and seeing political change happen. And by the way, in basically checks on the federal government when they're behaving poorly in areas of, for instance, our democracy. And I'll just tease that for now, but I'll come back to it. So we're going to go into this Google search here to give you just an idea of some of the things we're looking at here. So this is one of the biggest ones, right? And I'm going to see if I can zoom this out. Okay, so people can see it a little better. Okay. All right. So let's focus in again on this Northeast region. And obviously they demarcate regions a little bit differently from the way I would. I think that Eastern Virginia and Northeastern North Carolina are also significant parts of this map. But the fact is, what you'll see is that among Democrats, these are the most important numbers. Among Democrats in the Northeast, 39% support a new regional union, which is seceded. And I imagine that the number would be much higher if we weren't talking about secession and we were talking about just a more regional approach to politics. And then among independents, which obviously is a very sort of nebulous number, but it's, the folks that aren't registered as either Democrat or Republican, it doesn't really tell you much about their ideological leaning. But the fact is 35%, again, that's a pretty high percentage, support a regional union. So when you focus in on that, you see between these two, you have almost, 4 and 10, 2 and 5 folks that are open to the idea of looking at politics more regionally. So let's go back to this other tab. The other one I wanted to show is that certain other groups are starting to look at regional politics too, and Gallup News is one of them. They do a lot of great polling for the country, and so they have this map here. Let's see if I can. Okay, well, you can see it. Okay, so and they are a little bit more inclusive. They include Virginia in their bit here, and they of course call it the white collar East Coast, which is, I think, not the best way of viewing this area. But the fact is that they are seeing that this is more of a regional, coalition. There's a natural regional coalition here. So I'm going to pop out. Pop back in here. So this is what we're looking at, right? We're seeing that there are these regions, and that not only is it right there in front of people if they actually take a look at it, but the fact is when they're actually told that, oh, maybe there's a way to start thinking about politics more regionally, they actually want it in substantial numbers, and this is without any sort of push to move in this direction. And so that's a huge deal. That's a big thing. And so the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which kind of wraps us in terms of the big stuff that I wanted to focus on, is the fact that this really changes the game in terms of how we're approaching politics. And so let me tell you a little bit about what I mean. The fact is, when we look at these important policies, when we look at healthcare, when we look at climate change, I believe the number is 68,000 people are dying just from lack of healthcare in the U.S. Every year. And we're already seeing that the planet is becoming more and more inhospitable to humans due to climate change. It's getting worse and worse. We're seeing more severe storms. We're seeing more jumps back and forth in terms of temperature. Even in this in this winter season, we're seeing great jumps from, we literally in the North Shore here, we had a day that was 60 degrees right at the beginning of March. And then it jumped back down to the 30s from there. And, while it was nice to have a day where, it was super nice outside and we could go hang out outdoors, the fact that this is an indicator that the planet is, not in equilibrium, and that things are going awry. And the fact is that we're not seeing our federal government move this stuff forward. We're seeing the system just not functioning, period. And the only way that this changes is if we change the system. And so this is something, like I said, I've been thinking about for a while. And just wanted to check one thing here. Okay. I've been thinking about this for a while, and there are basically three kind of ways that I see it of looking at looking at how to approach politics regionally. And they sort of are in increasing levels of, I guess, change to the system, if you will. The first is the idea of using basically the federal government approaching policy regionally by delegating sort of regulatory work to regions. And one area that I think this would be useful for would be climate change. The idea that we could designate zones as the federal government to say this area of the country should be focusing on climate change, and we're going to designate some money to kind of move policy forward in those regions, move frameworks of development forward in the direction of addressing climate change better. And because there's the political will in those areas to do that, it's a perfect area to do that. And obviously this is sort of the least, I guess, major kind of change to the system. And it's done at the federal level and basically federal delegation to the state and regional level. But this is especially when it comes to things like water, clean water, and when it comes to things like climate change and other resources, lumber comes to mind. This is a move that could really have an impact. So the next sort of tier, as I see it, of ways to build regional policy and politics is through interstate compacts. So this is sort of something that we have a framework in the Constitution for, the idea of basically working across boundaries of states to on policy that those states have a shared stake in and perhaps a shared interest in. The problem is that they do require federal consent, and it's usually from Congress to basically approve the use of an interstate compact. So it has to be, voted on, essentially. But one area that I think this could be very useful is healthcare. Basically, I think the Northeast, broadly speaking, we have a number of robust single payer campaigns in the region where people are really interested in moving healthcare forward. And as I mentioned before, building the risk pool, including more people, makes it a more financially salient move. And I think that this could be huge. I think, especially as I mentioned, Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, to a lesser extent, states like Connecticut. These are states that are interested in moving this forward. And if we were to say, okay, you don't have to worry as one state about handling this, but we can build a pool together and we can collaborate on legislation, pass it at the state level, pass it between the states, that could really move things forward. And so that would be, I think, there's a really strong case that we could build this. Now, it does require, again, sort of consent of the federal government, and we know that can be difficult. But it's worth considering at the very least. And so from there, we get to the sort of, I guess, most controversial kind of framework for how to build this. And this is something that I've been cogitating on for, frankly, a couple of years at this point. And it's the idea of federal decentralization. And there are sort of, I guess, degrees of how you approach this as well. But the idea basically being that federal power is directly delegated and sort of irreversibly, if you will, delegated to these regions, again, to move policy forward. And one of the areas that I think this could be most useful is in terms of democracy reform. I think we've seen with the January 6th riots, a lot of folks on sort of my ideological bent directly look at January 6th and think it's a way that the federal government is imposing things like a new or trying to impose things like a new Patriot Act, a way to surveil us and to over-police us more. But the fact is, the riots themselves are not the thing that concerns me, although obviously it was a terrible day in our history. The thing that really concerns me is the fact that 147 Republicans went in after those riots and voted to overturn elections in 2 states. I believe those 2 states were Arizona and Pennsylvania. And that to me is really troubling. The idea that, unilaterally our government can just set aside our popular will and say, we're not going to, we're just going to ignore those votes. I think this is one of those things that was a wake-up call for folks, especially in my region, in the Northeast and in Massachusetts in particular. The idea that our president was advocating for us to just throw out those votes. That's unacceptable. And ultimately, I consider myself a democracy reform candidate. I think we need to look at ways to move policy forward by thinking about ways to innovate the system. And I mentioned the last live stream that I come from an entrepreneurship background, a background in building innovative things. And I think that our democracy can use some innovation. And so that's why, while it is controversial, I think it's something we can discuss and maybe, land on something a little bit perhaps less extreme if that's what folks want. And I will be in close consultation, if I'm so fortunate as to be elected, with my community about the ways that they want to proceed forward with something like this. But the fact is, when our federal government is just steps away from overturning federal elections, we need to be able to stand up against that. And that's what I think federal decentralization at the regional level is about. And I think the Northeast could be a bastion for democracy and democratic governance. And I want to build that kind of movement. And obviously there are, other sort of democracy reforms that I talk about in my campaign that I think are really important, like building a top two primary system with ranked choice voting or star voting, which I believe are voting systems that are more representative of the public, that better represent voter opinion, and that mean that we're more likely to get an answer, an election result that reflects that. And I think that that's really important. And I also think that we should be building, in addition to these regional coalitions, I think we need to build more communication between the state level of government and the local level. I think there's a lot that is lost by not doing that. And so these are just a couple of things when I think about democracy reform. But obviously we're talking here in this stream, we're focusing on how we can do this at sort of the regulatory, structural level. And so that's what I mean when I talk about these three approaches: federal regulatory delegation of policy to regions, interstate compacts, and perhaps we might be open to approaching something like actual federal decentralization for at least policy issues. I think certain policy issues would be supremely useful. All right, so I'm going to take just a look here and see. It's up. Okay. All right, so there's one other thing that sort of is connected to this idea of federal decentralization, but perhaps kind of can be its own thing as well. And that's the idea that I think we're at a point in our history where we need to recognize history. And the fact is that, our country was never really structured as to be a unit, in the sense that, we chose 50 states, right? Over time, we built these boundaries, and they were built by, natural boundaries like rivers, arbitrary boundaries like geographic coordinates. And the fact is that, especially with innovations in infrastructure over our long and storied history, the fact is that those boundaries are less and less significant. And we've kind of, I think there's a lot of, if you ask your average news person that looks at the policy space, you'll see that we kind of self-select places that we want to be because we think that they will align with our politics. And so the natural extension, as I see it, is to actually talk about democratizing our state borders and say, okay, these are the areas. This is the area that I want, because I think it's one where I can see the policy changes that I want happen. And whether it's, voting with your feet, in a sense, moving, which is obviously out of reach for many people, or just voting that I want to be, on this, I want to be in this state, I think is very useful. And, Massachusetts is an interesting case because we are, I'd say, slightly more homogenous in terms of our politics than other areas, though I think my district on the North Shore is very much more independently minded than, kind of as you get closer to the Boston area. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to run here, is because I saw that our district is very thoughtful in terms of their politics, and very intentional in terms of who they put into office. But we have to acknowledge that we are also an extension of Boston in terms of our economy in a lot of ways. That we, a lot of us commute, a lot of us get our, for businesses, get a lot of our resources from Boston, or sell some of our, farming resources and that sort of thing to Boston. that we are a sort of cohesive group, and representation is very important in that group, and that's why our politics are different. I think we recognize that there needs to be some kind of check on what is effectively a one-party system in Boston as our hub. But how should I put it? There is a cohesion to that area, to that connection, and so it makes sense that we lie within the same borders. But I'll admit that this is a greater political project than even within the scope of my campaign to talk about this. But I care about it a great deal, and I wouldn't be running for political offices if I didn't see an opportunity to create some change that way. And so let's see, anything else that I wanted to make sure we covered here? I think we're actually in a pretty good spot. So I really wanted to spend some time and kind of start to lay this out for folks. And I want it to be very much a discussion. And so I encourage people to please comment, please, share this video, especially with folks in the North Shore of Massachusetts and the state of Massachusetts as well, because I think it's worth initiating this discussion. Again, I wouldn't be running if I didn't think it was. My platform is all stuff that I care about deeply, or I wouldn't be convincing myself to undertake this very new thing. As I said last video, this is my first run for political office. The fact is, I don't actually really see myself as a as becoming a career politician. I'm here to advance policy. That's why I'm in this race, and that's why if I were so fortunate as to get into politics, if I get to a point where I've at least advanced the political discussion enough, then unless of course people want to keep me there in office, then maybe I go try my hand at something else. I've been many things in my life. In my 34 years, I've managed to squeeze a lot in. I've been a server, I've been an entrepreneur, I've been a tech support operator. I've managed to squeeze a lot in. And who knows what might be next. But this is the challenge that I've decided to take on, and hopefully move the political discussion forward some. And so I think I'll kind of clear it out there and finish up. So thank you for joining me on this second live stream where we're talking about what it would mean to build Northeastern regional politics, to start thinking about politics regionally, because it means that we could actually maybe start to move forward some of the stuff that we stagnated on for so long, some of this policy that we really care about and can move forward. So I invite people to please, if you are interested, join us in, we're at 8:33. Join us at 9 p.m. Eastern, about 27 minutes, for our Twitter space, where we can have a little bit more of an interactive conversation. I very much look forward to it, but thank you so much for joining me for this little live stream as we get things running and get things off the ground. I really appreciate it, but thank you so much for joining me, and have a great one. Peace.